Extending the functionality of your content management system is incredibly important. The ability to add features that your content editors need while at the same time maintaining your own developer experience is paramount to creating great workflows inside your company. We know this at Hygraph, and we've created the app framework to deal with just this issue. We want the app framework to marry amazing editor experience with amazing developer experience so that your entire company gets the superpowers it deserves. Hey everyone, I'm Brian Robinson, Head of Developer Relations here at Hygraph. And in this video today, we're going to take a look at what it takes to create a sidebar element, a custom sidebar app for your Hygraph project. Now this is a use case of like a marketing team. We're going to create a way of downloading a QR code that matches up with the final URL for any item inside of your Hygraph project. All right, so let's get started. This is what we are building today. We have a QR code over in the right-hand column over in the sidebar area. This is going to actually look for a custom URL set in the plugin configuration and then also one specific field inside of our project form. So in this case, we're looking at the slug and we're going to make this unique per page. And you can see here as we type, even as we go back and fix typos, the QR code on the right-hand side changes automatically. And then we can click download and a QR code is downloaded to our browser. You can see it's really, really large, but that's because SVGs are infinitely scalable. All right, so let's get started on building this out. First and foremost, we need a good starting point. We could start with just a blank React project or a blank Next.js project or even a Next.Vue or Nuxt project, but we have Quickstart guides that get you through all the boilerplate that you need to get this running. Here we have the Hygraph Next.js Quickstart for the apps. Again, we're going to have more in the future. There's going to be a React one, a Vue one, and a Nuxt one. So you can use kind of your framework of choice on some of that. The first thing we need to do is we need to get a Next.js app up and running, and we can do that via this Quickstart. So we're going to grab this command. It's going to create a Next.js project based on this example project, and then it's going to be whatever we want to name it for our directory. So let's come into our terminal, and let's add this in. In this case, I'm going to make this, say, QR code app. This will install all the dependencies and create the directory in our current location. From here, we'll be able to cd into the directory and open this in VS Code. So we'll follow the instructions here. We'll go ahead and cd into QR code app, and then we will open this in VS Code. We'll go ahead and run this in terminal by running npm run dev, and then we'll be ready to start working on our project. As a quick overview, we have in this boilerplate all the things we need to run a Next app, including our package.json with some scripts in there. But we also have the pages directory. And inside the pages directory, we have all the different types of apps you can create built together, all the extensions you can create. We're going to work on the sidebar app today, but we'll also need the setup file. This is going to allow for us to have our installation and our configuration flows at the same time. And in fact, that's where we're going to start today. So the basic structure of this file is we import a few different things at the top. We import some items from the app SDK, the React version of that. And then we have a component library called Baukasten, which you can find out more about at baukasten.hygraph.com. This is going to allow for us to have some styling that we'd expect from the Hygraph interface. From there, at the bottom, we're going to export out our basic functional component. It's just going to return a wrapper. The wrapper is coming from our app SDK. This is going to give the app everything it needs to know about the current situation of this application. And then we're going to have our setup element. Our setup element is going to do a quick check. It's going to grab the installation information off of the use app hook, and it's going to check the current status. If the status is currently completed, we're going to display the configure component. And if it is not currently completed, we are going to display the install component. You can see that the install component has a method on it called the update installation. This is coming from use app from our hooks. And then inside that, we just have a very simple display, which is a stack with a box inside of it, a quick heading, a little bit of text, and a button that on click is going to run the update installation method, and it's going to pass that an object with the status of completed and some configuration object. This is where we can pass in additional information about our application. You can see in the configuration area, in the configure method, we have a very similar structure. In this case, we just change it from install to save, and we have the update installation function as well to keep the status as completed and then pass in any configuration information in this object. All right, and now that we have this running and we've taken a look at the way the install and the configure work, let's go ahead and install this into our project and we'll work from there. So if you go into your project, you'll see on the left-hand side the apps area. Right now I've got the localized app installed from another demo that I was working on. I want to add my new app into this and work on it from my local project. Down here we've got this want to create your own custom app. I can click that to go over to my apps. You can see I've got a whole bunch and we're going to create a new one by clicking add new app. Here we have to fill out a few different pieces. The name of this app will be QR code app. It needs a description. This will display a QR code in the sidebar. And then we give it an avatar URL. This is just the image that will show up on every element that we create for this app. So in this case, it's just gonna be my smiling face from Twitter. Finally, we need to give it an API ID and a setup URL. The API ID is how somebody's going to be able to install this into a project, and the setup URL is to our local project. In this case, we'll call it QR-code. And the setup URL should be the route in our project that will be where the setup and configure are. This is at localhost 3000 at the setup route for that. From here, we can check out the permissions. This app doesn't need any of these permissions, but if we wanted to say write to the content API or create schema or create webhooks, we need to give it some sort. So in this case, I'm going to give content API read write, just in case I decide to add this later. You cannot update these permissions once the app is added. And then finally, we can add various elements to our application. We're going to go ahead and add in a sidebar app here. We'll call this one QR code. Give it an app ID of QR code. This type area is where we're going to decide which type it's going to be. It can be a field, a form sidebar, or a page. In this case, we will use form sidebar. It'll have a URL in our project. So in this case, it's going to be the local host again. And it's going to be at /sidebar, which is the route over in our project. You can have a description. I'm going to leave that blank, and we'll come back to configure later on. And then finally, once all of this has been added, we can click Register App. This is going to register it to our overall Hygraph account. You can see here that we do get a client ID and a secret. This is so that you can do token exchange if you need to. In our case, we're not going to need these, but be sure to copy them and put them into your environment variables as needed. From here, we can go back to our apps list, and we will see at the bottom the QR code app is ready to go. We can go into edit if we need to. We can share it. We can delete it. I'm going to click this install app button, and we will install it into the project we were looking at. In this case, it's the app test project, and we can install it onto any environment we wish at this time. You can see it's going to notify the user whether or not there are additional permissions this app's going to have. The authentication token is that first token that we saw, and then the read write is for the content API, and we selected that in creation. Click Authorize App, and we will be good to add this sidebar element. You can see here we have our installation flow up and running. So the text that we had in our setup route is all displayed here, as well as this button. Let's go ahead and fill out our installation flow and our configuration flow so that we can get all the data we need for our project. So you can see here there's that heading, that text, and that button. In this case, we want to get an additional piece of information from the user installing the app. That's going to be the URL that we need to make our QR code work. Every project will have a different URL, and by default, Hygraph doesn't know the end URL for your website. So we need to define that inside of our configuration. To do that, we're going to create a label and a field for that in these forms. However, we're going to use it in the installation flow and in the configuration flow. So let's create this as its own standalone component. So we'll create a functional component. We'll call it configure form, and we'll pass into it as props the URL and the handle change function that will handle the change as the form updates. From there, this is a relatively simple component. We'll return out a little bit of markup. In this case, we're going to use a stack from our Baukasten component library. We'll give it a gap of about 12 for spacing. And then inside that, we're going to use a new component called the label component. This is going to map to a HTML standard label, and we'll give it an HTML4 attribute, and we'll say this is for the URL field, and then we'll say this is the URL label for the text. And then we'll also use the input component, again from Buckausten, and we're going to give it a name of URL. And then on change, we want to pass this the handle change method that we get from the properties. And then finally, we need a value for this, and the value is going to be the URL that gets passed in as well. And we'll update that with a hook inside of our main component. Finally, it's a self-closing tag. We'll close that up, and now we can save this in. And we can use this down in both of our installation and configuration flow. So we're currently working on the install component. We can add this right beneath our text. So we will use our configure form, and we will pass it a handle change. In this case, it's going to be a function called handle change, and then the URL, and this will be a string named URL. We need to manage the state for our URL. So in this case, we're going to use React's useState by setting up const URL and set URL equal to use state. And we need to make sure we include that from React. We'll do that at the top. And we'll start it as a blank string. Since in the install flow, there is no way for this to be anything to begin with. Then we will also set our handle change function. Const handle change equals a function that's going to have the event. And then we're going to pass that in, and we're going to check the target value of this event, and we're going to set the URL to that. So we'll set URL to e.target.value. We can save that in, and when we go back and look, we now have a form field here. And then we can start typing and see localhost, and it just kind of works. It's all kind of saved into that area. Now we need to save this, and when we click install, put that in our configuration object. So inside of our button, we have this onClick function. We're going to use update installation to update the status to completed, and then we're also going to pass in the URL as one of the properties on that object. Save that, and now we should be able to save our URL to make this work. So we'll just say localhost again, just to keep things consistent. We'll click install app. And once it's done installing, you'll see that our form has gone away, and that's because we're now fully in the configuration flow. So let's go ahead and add this same functionality to the configuration flow as well. So right in the same spot, right below text, we'll bring our configure form, and then we also need to bring our handle change and our URL. So let's grab those from our installation flow and bring them down to our configuration flow. But instead of just the regular state, let's go ahead and check for a specific URL value. Theoretically, we've already saved this into the configuration, so we should be able to access that configuration value and set the state to that on the first load. To do that, not only from use app do we need the update installation, we also need the entire installation object. And that's where we're going to be able to grab our configuration values. So now from within use state in the configure step, we can check installation.config.url and put that as our state, or if that doesn't exist, we will put that blank string. Now we save this in, and we have from our data the URL from the configuration, and it's there by default. And then finally, we need to also update our button to do this update installation and pass in the URL like we did in the installation flow. After that URL is saved in, we're ready to add this sidebar element to our project. We'll head over to our schema. We'll go to the test case model that we have here. And then in the sidebar area, we can add our custom widget called QR code. And there it is, our smiling face of the avatar we added as the image for this project. We can give it a display name and a description. Let's just leave it as QR code with a blank description for now. The description would be for letting your editors know how to use this area. Once it's added, we can move it all the way to the top, and we're ready to start working on our code. Let's go ahead and navigate to the content for this model, and we can go into this drafted element here. You can see here's our QR code. This is the boilerplate in action, QR code, and the click me button that has an alert of hello. And when we go to the code, you can see that right here. We have a sidebar element. It is a flex with a button. The button has click me, and it will alert hello. Now let's go ahead and change this to be our QR code. First, we don't want this to be a flex element anymore. We're gonna make it a stack with a gap of about, I don't know, 12, and then fix that closing tag and import that from Baukasten as well. And then we also need this to have a QR code component. I don't want to make a QR component from scratch. Luckily, this is a JavaScript project and we have npm. We can npm install the React QR code component. That's going to install for us, and then we will import it at the top. QR code from React QR code as the package. Once we have that, we can go put a generic QR code in our application. So we can say QR code, and that's going to accept a few different props. The first of which is going to be our value. In this case, we'll just have this be a string, and this is what we'll change out later on. We'll set a size of 256. And we will give it a little bit of CSS just to make sure it fits the space that we want it to. And then finally, it's an SVG, so let's give it a view box and set that to 0, 0, 256, and 256. Save that in, and when we come over here, you can see we have our QR code ready to go. Now, this is just a QR code that represents that string of string. We want this to take the URL and the slug from our project. To do that, we can start by getting the installation object off of the useForm sidebar extension and do something similar to what we did in our installation flow. We want to get the config value off of this. So we'll create a new variable called base URL, and we will set that to the installation.config.url. And then we'll build a full URL based on that and a to-come slug. So const full URL equals the base URL slash some slug that we'll get into in a second. As a string literal here, slash some slug. And then we'll use this full URL as the value of our QR code, as well as the value that we alert in our click me alert box down here, just so we can see things in action. So we'll save that in, the QR code changes, I click me, and you can see here we have localhost 3000 slash some slug. So we are getting roughly what we expect there. Now, next up, we want to be able to actually get this slug, this actual value from the slug field. And we actually want it to be live rendered from the slug field as we type ahead. So in order to use any item in our content form, we need to actually grab the form object, and that comes from the useApp method in our React SDK. You can see that automatically went in our import up top, and I've got the useApp down here. This gives me all the information from the form. So we're also going to set up a state on this. So we'll set const slug and set slug. And we will set that to useState, not forgetting to import that at the top in our React. And then we also want to use the useEffect method in React as well to take a look at what happens when the render happens. So in this case, we want to grab something off the form. There's a method called subscribe to field state. And then we can tell it we want to subscribe to the slug field state. And we can give it a function to fire when that field changes. So in this case, we're going to get a function. The default is to get the field state from that. So then we can set our slug variable to the field state.value. That's the value that's currently residing within this field, this slug field. And then finally, we can pass in what variables to watch on the page for when the re-render should happen. In this case, we don't need any currently. So now when we come back into our content, we can click me, and you can see localhost 3000, this is a title. So that's great. Our slug is now rendering. And now as we type ahead, you can see it live changes the QR code. And when we click me, we get the latest changes to the slug field. So now we have a functioning QR code in our sidebar. However, this is a hard-coded value. We also want to make sure this is configurable whenever we install this sidebar widget in any of our models. To do that, we need to start by updating our app. So we'll go to our user and we'll go to the Your Apps area. And sure, we can get rid of these changes. That's fine. We'll go down to the app that we're making and we'll make an edit to it. We're going to create a configuration piece for the sidebar element. You can see down here we have a config area, and this accepts an object of various configuration items. In this case, we're going to bring a slug field in because we want to know what the slug field name is. Give it a type of string, give it a little description, and a display name. And this is going to be what shows up when a user goes to add this widget to any sidebar in their project. So we'll go ahead and save the changes. And we can go back to our project. So now we can go into our schema. And inside of our schema, let's go ahead and edit the QR code. And this would work the same as if you were adding it from the beginning. And you can see down here, we have a slug field. And we can tell it that the slug field needs to be the string slug. We'll update that, and now we can access that from within our application as well. So now instead of this slug string that we have in our subscribe to field state, we need to get something from the extension itself. We need to get the sidebar config. So we can do that by bringing in the extension object off of the useFormSidebar extension method. And then we can replace the slug with the extension.sidebarconfig dot the name that we gave it, the API reference we gave it. In this case, it is the slug field name. We can save that in. And when we come back to our content, hopefully nothing has changed. So here it is. It has a title. The title's in there, and we can continue working as if it was the same. And then finally, because this is a React component, we can do anything that we would do inside of a normal React component. So if we want to make sure that this has a click state that allows us to download the SVG, we can certainly do that. Now, it's a little bit more complicated than I'd like in this kind of perfect world, but we can certainly create a file and have it download to the user's browser. The first thing we need to do is actually get DOM access to the QR code via React's useRef functionality. So we'll set up a new const SVG element, and we'll set that to the useRef method, and we'll just start that by being null. And then when our QR code renders on the page, we can set the ref for it to that SVG element, and that will connect things so that we can now act upon the QR code as well. So the next thing we want to do is we'll replace this button with an anchor tag that we can use to actually download a file. So we'll say href, since we need one, we'll have that just be to the $. We'll give it a download name, which is an HTML property. We'll call this qr.svg. And then we need an on-click handler for it. And in this case, we'll set up a handle click method. And then let's give it a little bit of text, and we'll say download QR code. So now we need to set up the handle click function to make this work. This is where things get a little dicey, but it's all just basic JavaScript in the end. So we'll set up a handle click function that will take an event from the click. And then we're going to need to set up a few different things here. First, we need to get the XML serializer and start working on serializing our content into some source. So in this case, we've got the new XML serializer with the source equal to the serializer.serialize to string, the current version of the SVG element, whatever that is right at this moment. And then we set up a couple conditions here just to make sure that we are getting this as an SVG. We're going to set up some additional information in our declaration here. We'll add the XML to begin with, and then we will add a URL that will be the encoded version of this for when the click happens. And then finally, we will set the current href to the new URL, which we just created from this URL encoded source. So now when we save this in, we have a download QR code link. And when we click that, we get a downloaded QR code SVG. When the whole of the JavaScript ecosystem is at your disposal, any number of new features and editor experiences are ready to go. This functionality doesn't just work for the sidebar. You can also create new field experiences inside of the content form. You can even create complete standalone pages inside of your Hygraph project. that really means that any editor experience you need for your company is at your fingertips with just a little bit of JavaScript. So if you have any questions about creating a new app within the app framework, be sure to check out our Slack community at slack.hygraph.com and ask away. We're here for you whenever you need it. All right, thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.